Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back. Appreciate you being here. If you found us, it could have been by chance, or maybe you were looking, maybe you typed in the word housing. We're going to talk about that today and some of the challenges at the present time regarding that. This is What's Love Got to Do with It. She is somebody who has this on her radar and so much more. Her specialty is construction litigation, housing litigation, but again, her finger is on the pulse of everything, as you might have seen from the times we've gotten together. She's a partner at Greenspoon, Marder, LLP in New York City. Our professional of the year, Carol Sigmond, is back with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Steve. How are you?
Happy we're talking about this, and it's almost as if you were reading my mind, because I'm seeing changes within housing, and the first one that stands out for me is Florida, and things are radically changing there. Prices are plummeting. I just saw last night in the Cape Coral area, there's a housing crisis because of the construction, because of insurance issues. It's on my radar too, because I sold some property that I was given by a relative like 10 years ago. And I part of me regretted selling it, but then if I built a house there, what would that be worth now? The part of me is like, whew, dodged one. What's your view of the housing situation right now, Carol?
It's complicated and in flux. I mean, what else would you expect from a lawyer? A lawyer-like answer. So, and Florida is particularly complicated, but let's look sort of nationally, and then we can drop into Florida. The housing market is slowing. Not necessarily a great sign for the economy. Definitely not a great sign for young people. It is a bit of a buyer's market, but it's a buyer's market for people who can handle the current mortgage rates, which are, not at historic highs, but higher than they have been in a number of years. So we have some increasing inventory in housing, some economic uncertainty associated with the tariffs. We have the somewhat higher mortgage rates and an indication that the Fed is not moving with great alacrity to lower rates. The buyers have some better negotiating power because there's less, there's more inventory, but prices are continuing to go up. Prices are going to continue to go up for two reasons. One is the tariffs, and two is the workforce issues. So that's the overall sort of look at housing. Florida is suffering some unusual impacts. When you mentioned the insurance issue.
Yep.
It's getting harder and harder to insure property in Florida. Secondly, you have a number of non-Americans who owned homes in Florida, particularly Canadians, who are selling them. So there seems to be some sale of property by non-Americans in Florida. I don't know if it's tariff related. I don't know if it's immigration related. I don't know if it's insurance related. It may be a combination of all three. So you have some unique issues in Florida that are driving prices either sidewise or down. I would be cautious of Florida because of the rising sea levels in Florida. Inland, probably not so risky, although you still have the risk of hurricane. But those are all risk factors that you have to evaluate if you want to buy in Florida.
Sure.
It's possible to hurricane-proof a house. It's possible to get a location that is less vulnerable. There are a lot of things you can do, but I think from a climate point of view, Florida could be in a little bit of trouble.
What's your feeling overall? You said that housing prices aren't going to go down anytime soon for the rest of the country. Interest rates. Where are we at with that? What's your forecast?
Interest rates, interesting. Well, I listened to Jerome Powell, who indicated that the tariffs are encouraging them to keep the rates higher.
Mm.
I think the current tax bill that's, working its way through Congress right now, I guess it's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That is a fairly significant wealth transfer from the poor and middle class to the wealthy. That's going to tend to have the Fed wanting to keep interest rates up, I think, because it's going to put more cash out into the market in certain ways. So I'm not sure from an inflation point of view or a tax interest rate point of view, this is the best way to go about getting rates down, if that were your goal. It's a very complicated situation, and the tariffs are acting as a tax right now, and they are taking money out of the system, and they're driving up prices. So the Fed is concerned, and I think the Fed is going to leave interest rates where they are. I don't think they're going to raise them, but I think they're going to leave them where they are. And I don't think we're going to see until the tariff situation shakes out a little bit. I don't think we're going to see interest rates going down anytime soon.
Not as a professional looking at this, but just somebody that's observing. To me, it seems like nothing has really changed. The housing prices are up there, and depending on where, even a little bit higher than they were even a year ago or so, maybe a year and a half. Interest rates are up there. A little bit of fluctuation, but it's nothing to really get excited about. Would you say that's kind of where we're at?
Yes. Yes. I don't think a lot has changed. And I'm not sure that for the average American, the current tax bill is going to make that much of a difference. I mean, for some households, they may get another $5,000 in spendable income. You have up to 12 million Americans facing a loss of access to health insurance and health care. You have some prospect of hospitals closing. Healthcare has been one of the stabilizing forces in the economy. It's going to shake, rattle, and roll a little. That could cause more uncertainty.
Why do you say, how is it stabilizing?
Well, it's been it's 11% of our national GDP, something like that, and it's been fairly constant. There's been, because of Obamacare expanding access to healthcare to more people, there have been more people hired, not necessarily as physicians, but as technicians and nurses and things like that. So there's been some growth in the area. There's been new drug developments, that sort of thing. I think it's been a fairly good for the economy, but you could have job losses if rural hospitals close. If you have people losing health coverage, they're not going to be going to the doctor. So you could have clinics closing. I mean, it's very hard to be certain.
What's your view? I know we just pivoted over to healthcare, but that's how this works. What's your view of these large health companies swallowing up, buying up smaller practices? Either, the local family physician being taken over, or maybe, small practice, a couple of locations now, the big conglomerates have come in. And certainly, we're both in the New York area. There's a few major players, call it 3 or so, that are really it, except for some, it's radically different than it was 5-10 years ago. Is this a good thing?
That's a very interesting question. So let's step back and take a quick historic view. In the 1920s, I think around 1927 or 1928, the Sears family commissioned a study on healthcare in the United States. And that study said a number of things were going to happen. One is it predicted group practice in ever expanding sizes. It suggested that there needed to be some shared cost mechanism. And in fact, one of the authors of the study went on to found Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Wow.
So that's kind of that. It predicted more tensions between the hospitals and the doctors, and so it had, and it also predicted more community-based healthcare. We haven't seen all of that. We never really saw the community-based healthcare develop in this country. We did see Blue Cross and the sort of the insurance piece come to fruition through the initially underemployment, and it kind of stayed there. It never morphed out of being connected to jobs. There was never any other way to buy insurance prior to Obamacare except through your job. So
don't even get me started. By the way, I can't even.
Let's not go there. We're not going there. We're not. I'm just trying to set a little bit of history.
The dirtiest word in my world is marketplace. That's it.
Yeah. So, yeah, and okay, if we go there for 30 seconds, we're going to say that the biggest failure of Obamacare is the way that the third-party administrators have taken over healthcare.
Horrible.
They are
abysmal.
They have put themselves between the insurance companies and the doctors and the patients, and they have done so with a profit motive. And all of the efforts that the Obamacare made to try to, make medicine more like a public utility and less like a profit center, a moneymaker, that failed because of the growth of these third-party administrators. And
so I'm going to ask this question with the marketplace. Fantastic if you're at a certain income level and you get credit from the state, and many states have the marketplace. But if you don't get anything from the state, why, in the creation of the universe, must you buy your health insurance if it's not provided by your job through the marketplace? You said it's not about the money. They're hijacking money right there. Come on.
Yeah, no, it is about the money. No, it is about the money. It was not supposed to be about money.
Oh, okay.
It's become about money.
Yeah.
So we are now way out of housing, but let's go with it. Let's go with it anyway. So each state was allowed to implement Obamacare its own way. New York made some decisions that may or may not have been wise. And these were decisions primarily made by Andrew Cuomo and his administration. What they decided to do was to create a pool that consisted of small business groups like accountant groups and doctor groups and lawyer groups that used to come together through their associations and buy health insurance. Okay. So they said, no, you can't do that anymore. We're going to eliminate all of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to put you in with the Medicaid population. So they put small business, the Medicaid population, and some of the worker comp cases into a pool. And so you took all of these people out of small business who had relatively good health and relatively good care, and you put them in with a group that did not have relatively good care or relatively good health. And all of a sudden, the community rating for that group became not very good. Then what they did was they said, oh, well, big business, they can community rate among themselves. So you wound up with this disparity in which small business in New York is carrying a disproportionate share of Medicaid costs. And that's not going to get any better under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I don't know that it's going to get much worse, but it's not going to get better. So then the second problem is, and New York has a lot of labor unions, there's not supposed to be caps on insurance coverage, but there still are caps within the unions. And what ends up happening is when the union members get sick and they exceed their caps, they wind up in the pool. So you get more sick people into the pool that's being community rated with a population that doesn't include any government employees and doesn't include, mega business. And so it's just not, it's not very workable. New York needs to take a long and careful look at what they're doing. And I'm not suggesting that you, for a minute, take healthcare away from anybody. I am suggesting you need to take a long and careful look at how you're funding it and where the burdens fall. And to New York's credit, they are trying to deal with some of these third-party administrators, but there needs to be a concerted effort to deal with the third-party administrators.
It's like the Wild West.
The man who was killed had an income of a salary of like $10 million.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, that ought to strike somebody as a problem. And there's too much money in the third-party administrators. And if you look at Medicare has no third-party administrators to speak of. There's hardly any doorkeepers. Now there's all these claims of fraud, and there has been some, yes, but not that much. So the question you have to ask is the money being spent on third-party administrators actually well spent? This is a very tricky area, and it needs to be studied.
Yeah.
And to her credit, Susan Collins has been trying to get some attention to this issue. And I think she understands it, at least from what I've read. She does understand that you've got to take a long and careful look at the third-party administrators and regulate them intelligently. But she isn't getting much support from either side of the aisle, because I think on the Republican side, they're so hostile to Obamacare, they can't think about reform. And the Democrats are so defensive about it, they can't think about reform either. But in fact, that needs to happen. So that's my comment. That's sort of my position on Obamacare. We have to take a long, hard look at the third-party administrators. I think the hospitals have been working very hard to make themselves more efficient and deliver better care. The big hospital groups, the group practices, I think on balance are probably not a bad thing. I think the problem is that we need to have we need to be certain that we are supporting the group practices and clinics in less well-to-do areas. We need to make sure that those practices and clinics get the services they need. Now, credit to New York City. They have a whole team of people within the New York City Department of Health that goes out to these group practices in, less well-off areas and make sure that they have the refrigerators they need for the COVID vaccine. They have all of the stuff they need, and that they're getting it, and they're doing a lot of data collection on what's effective and what's working. Some of that is going to be impaired by the changes at HHS, which I do not think are a good idea. I think more information on health is better than less information. And so that is an issue that we are going to be confronting.
So I know we pivoted over to healthcare for a moment, and I'm still trying to process the study that was done in the 1920s that was pretty much spot on, like kind of dictated where our future would be. We have a few minutes left. We're talking about housing at the start. Let's go into that word that starts with a T and ends with an F.
Tariffs?
Oh, or an S. Yes.
Tariff?
Yeah.
We can go either place you want to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so there have been some developments since we last got together. There's been a second decision by a second court, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, finding the IEEPA tariffs to be outside the scope of the president's authority, and therefore basically saying they're void. All of these decisions are stayed because no one wants to create chaos by having them on, off. The Federal Circuit will be hearing oral argument on the VOS case, the first decision, at the end of July. They're hearing it en banc. attach no significance to the fact that there are injunctions keeping these tariffs in place. And it's for a very simple reason. The Court of International Trade has 50 state jurisdiction. They have jurisdiction all over the United States. So if they say no tariffs, it's no tariffs anywhere. They void the tariffs, they're not collected anywhere. The government then can't collect the revenue. If the CIT were reversed, there's no way for the government to go back and get the revenue. On the other hand, if the CIT is affirmed, they just return the money. So it's the injunction is no one should read much significance into it, because it's a matter of orderly government. It's not about the merits of the case. Read much more into the fact that they accelerated the briefing and that they decided to do it en banc. Read a lot into that. If you want a couple of predictions, I'll give you one. I think that the District of Columbia Circuit, which also has an appeal of one of these cases, is going to dismiss the appeal and direct the district court judge to vacate his decision and refer the case to the Court of International Trade. I believe all of the IEEP tariff cases are going to wind up at the Court of International Trade, for the very simple reason that although the word tariff doesn't appear in the IEEPA, and therefore, at least in theory, you have an argument that it's not a trade case. I'm sorry, it's a trade case. It belongs in the Court of International Trade. It's within their jurisdiction. And so I think the District of Columbia Circuit is going to duck the case. They're going to dismiss it. They're going to dismiss the appeal. They're going to remand. They're going to direct the district court to vacate the decision and ship the case over to the CIT, which will then sit on it because they've already decided the case. They're waiting for the Federal Circuit to decide the appeal. I'm not so sure the Supreme Court is going to take up an appeal of a decision of the Federal Circuit. If the IEEPA tariffs are voided by the Court of Appeals, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, I don't know that Judge Roberts is going to take it up. It would be a lot safer for the Supreme Court to duck. And he might well have the decision, the votes to duck, because you got a number of judges, 3 of them, the so-called left-wing judges, who Kagan, Jackson, and Sotomayor, who are going to say this is outside the president can't do this, it's not in the statute. Judges Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett tend to read statutes very literally. If the word tariff isn't there, they may well read it as it's not there. And if Roberts gets that sense, he also is a textualist. If he's also in agreement, they aren't even going to get the votes for cert. Even if Roberts were to vote for cert, I don't think he would bring it up just to have the Supreme Court affirm it. I think he would prefer not to have cert granted. So my sense is the Federal Circuit is going to affirm the CIT, and the Supreme Court's going to duck.
Got about 25, 30 seconds left. Quick question. Go back to January 20th-ish, 2025. Now here we are, July. What's the difference?
You have some tariffs in place. You have a lot of legal challenges to them. I think ultimately by this time next year, most of the tariff levels, with the possible exception of China, which does have unfair trade practices and is liable to certain sanctions. I think with the possible exception of China, you're going to have the same trade situation you had the day that Trump took office. But I think it's going to take us a year to get there.
We went everywhere. It didn't take us a year. We went from housing to healthcare to tariffs to thank you for your insight. Lots to think about there. I'm still processing that study in the 1920s about healthcare. Whoa. And that it went on to fund Blue Cross Blue Shield, or not fund, but create. Amazing.
I can tell you that story another time.
Instant feedback, steve@gmail.com. If you have any comments about today's show, we would welcome them, and we'll tackle that next time we get together. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Steve. Be well.
Appreciate it. You too. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
This is you over 30 years ago.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
And this is your mom when you drive her back from therapy.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Roles change without us noticing, and in your new role, we help you help. AARP gives you the information to help care for your mom so that you can have patience with her, just like she did with you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving or call 1-877-333-5885 to get practical health and wellness tips to provide even better care for your loved one.
Are we there yet?
Remember, visit aarp.org/caregiving. AARP, we help you help. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.